Welcome to the Ask Your Mentor podcast from Dementia Researcher and Alzheimer's Research UK, where mentees interview their mentors to hear about their careers, experiences, and to find out what makes them tick.
Hello and welcome to Ask Your Mentor. I'm Alex Mellor. I'm a PhD student at the University of Plymouth and I research acute inflammation predisposing white matter to ischemic injury in strokes and vascular dementia. In this show, I will be taking a trip through the academic career and picking the brain of my awesome mentor, Dr Josie Fullerton. So Josie and I were matched through the Alzheimer's Research UK mentoring programme last year, and I'm so pleased to have her support. The ARUK mentoring programme is a great free scheme that recognises the importance of mentoring and providing strong support systems. Delivered as part of their new ECR programme, it pairs people working at all career stages and matches people according to their needs. So do keep an eye on their website for the next round. So please welcome my fantastic guest and mentor, Dr Josie Fullerton.
Thank you very much. What a lovely introduction.
So these days, there is no such thing as a standard career path. So we start each of these shows by asking our guests to take us through their CV, sort of looking at how and why changes occurred, some of their thought processes that were going on at the time, achievements and lessons taken from each role. Josie, can you take us through your CV? You finished your undergrad in 2010 with a BSc in neuroscience. What came next?
Yeah, that's right. So in 2010, I finished at the University of Glasgow from my neuroscience degree. I actually went away and ran a horse riding stables for a year. So I decided at the end of my exams that I wanted a little break from science. And I wanted to go and see horses. As if any of you have had any conversations with me, you'll know that I like horses. So I went to work at the stables. I told everybody that I was a neuroscientist, and most of the girls asked if I could read their minds. So I ran the stables for about a year. And then after that year, I decided that I really missed science, and I really missed the sort of challenge of learning new things and looking into the unknown. So my old project supervisor actually contacted me suggesting I apply for a Master's of Research. And then after my during my Master's of Research, I should say, I studied the spinal cord injury. So I was looking at basically a method of assessing spinal cord injury. And then I also did a project on pulmonary arterial hypertension, which was with Lorraine work. I then, after my master's, went on to do a PhD, and I did stay in Glasgow. I went to a different university. So I went to the University of Strathclyde, where I studied the neural mechanisms of nicotine addiction. So it was basically just looking at addiction, but using nicotine as an example of the different sort of addiction pathways of the brain. So that was a 4-year process. I then moved on to I decided I wanted more. I kept wanting to stay in science. So I took my first postdoc position at the Queen Elizabeth with Dr Willie Stewart, where we looked at traumatic brain injury and the sort of early onset dementia that you can get associated with some of these different injuries. That I was there for 2.5 years, and I then moved to stroke research with Dr Lorraine Work, and then I'm still in the same research institute, and I'm now working on a slightly different project, but it's similar. It's more looking at the vasculature and hypertension effects of that. And that's where I am now.
I guess very, very impressive CV where you've sort of covered quite a lot of different sort of research areas, but how exactly did you sort of decide what to sort of focus and specialise your research in?
Yeah, it's a good question. So in my undergrad, I came along and I really loved anatomy. And the main part of anatomy I was attracted to was the brain, because with all parts of your body, structure follows function. So, you look at your joints or your heart, and you can tell that the heart's a pump, and you can tell that the joints are for moving and move in different directions. Whereas what I loved about the brain is he looked at the brain and it just looked like this big, grey slub of mush. And I just loved how that controls your speech, your thoughts, your movements, your everything. It's incredible. So that's why I then went on to neuroscience. And to be honest, I've kind of just followed on wherever my nose has taken me. I really enjoyed the research into addiction. I find that incredible, and that they still really don't totally understand how the different addiction pathways work. And traumatic brain injury I find fascinating. As a horse rider again, it's quite relevant. And then stroke research, I think there's only 2 approved treatments for stroke therapies, and it was looking into sort of methods of developing stroke therapies. And then the new project I'm on just now is again looking at different therapies. So it's always, I think it's always looking for something else, looking for something that is new and exciting, and something that people don't currently know really interests me.
Yeah, I think a lot of the reason why a lot of people come into dementia research is to really be sort of at the sort of forefront of that new understanding of things. So you mentioned that you've sort of always stayed within Glasgow, whether it's at University of Glasgow or Strathclyde. But how exactly did you sort of make a niche for yourself within a single institution?
Yeah, that's again a really good question. I think it's quite difficult at first to find your niche. In that, I mean, I'm still establishing it. I think it's hard when you're always working underneath somebody or with somebody who's leading you. You always tend to work on what your supervisor gives you or your postdoc kind of directs you. So I think it's finding something that you're really interested in and you're passionate about. Because if you're not passionate about it, then it's never really going to work. You need to be interested in it. So I think first of all, find something you're interested in. Second of all, find somebody that you respect in that area that can sort of roughly guide you, or a couple of people that can roughly guide you. But yeah, I think the main thing for me is finding something that I'm genuinely interested in and want to know more about.
So you mentioned that you took a break between doing your degree and doing your master's. Have you considered a career break at any other point within your research career, or have you just sort of just been driving straight on with it?
I think after my undergrad, I needed a break. I think your undergrad can be quite challenging. Same with the PhD. And you come to like a natural end point, and sometimes you're exhausted, or sometimes you want to carry on. So I think for me, that was kind of like a reflection on whether or not to continue down the science path, or whether to, I think I applied for a couple of graduate schemes and things like that, or whether or not horses was going to be my career path. Turns out there's not much money in horses, but then I also don't do that much current job for the money. But I also think I realised I wanted to own a horse rather than muck out other people's horses. Yeah. So after that, I took a break then. To be honest, I didn't really take a break between my end of my PhD and the start of my postdoc. I went on a couple of holidays. I crashed a couple of family friends' holidays, which was brilliant. So I went away with one of my friends to Greece and then another one to Spain. So I would definitely say that, when you have those opportunities to take a break, because I think one of the biggest parts of academia is the burnout. If you just keep going, you will exhaust yourself. So I'm glad I took a wee break, but it wasn't a career break.
And in your current role, how exactly do you manage sort of not getting yourself burnt out now?
So I am quite a busy person in work and out of work. So I am quite bad at kind of getting to the end of the week and I'm like, God, I'm knackered. I think what's really important is having a good work-life balance. I've got a really good group of friends and a really supportive partner. I've got 2 hairy beasts. I've got my dog and my horse. So I think it's important to do things that take you away from the lab, that you really, you switch your head off. So when you're on a horse, you can't think about anything else apart from what you're doing at that point. And I think whether that's, golf, tennis, or reading, or drawing, I think it's important to have some kind of downtime, I would say.
So is there any particular role that you've had across your time at Glasgow and Strathclyde that you've particularly enjoyed? Have you had like a particular favourite place to work, or?
Ooh. Anybody who's listening to this.
Some of your older research groups might have a bit of a field day with you if you say one over the other.
No. To be honest, I've been really lucky. So my PhD supervisor was really supportive. He was brilliant. He was actually a trained psychologist, and he was hilarious. He would like interview people, and he'd be like, "What's your favorite color?" And then they'd be like, "Green," and he was like, "Interesting." So he was like, he had a great sense of humor. So I loved working with him. Lorraine Work, many of you know. I don't know if you've met her yet, Alex, but when you do, she's brilliant. Yeah, she's lovely. I think Lorraine's really good at motivating you, getting the best out of you. I think it's important to work under somebody that you respect and that respects you. Um, so Lorraine was great at sort of pushing me to go for things that I maybe wouldn't normally go for. Um, so I love working for her. And then my current PI, Stu Nicklin, he's brilliant at sort of directing me a bit more. So I can be a bit like, "Whoa, what's over there?" Or like, "Whoa, what's over there?" Whereas he's kind of like, "Right, Josie, should you really be doing it at this time?" And both of them are fantastic fun on a night out. So we're doing, we do karaoke and we do sambuca shots sometimes. But I think it's really important to have a really sort of healthy like relationship in your lab group, and then the institute here, or the school here, sorry, is really supportive. So I think when you've got a really supportive environment, it's a really positive place to work and be. So yeah, I've been very lucky.
Yeah, and what advice would you give to an ECR who's looking to sort of seek out those good environments to work with? Because obviously it's very different from going to an interview and having that very formal chat with a PI, but once again, you don't know whether for like a postdoc or PhD supervisor, you can't get a full picture of what that's like from just an application process. So, what advice would you give someone for looking for those really supportive groups to be in?
Again, that's a great question. So my brother, he's just submitted his thesis about a month ago. So he's a no, Jesus, I think it's very niche. Brainy, and the rest, no common sense. Well, he's very intelligent. Anyway, so he did chemical physics, and he submitted his thesis, and he was looking at jobs, and whether he liked it or not, I sprouted my information and advice to him while we were out dog walking. And it is difficult, you're right, because you see an advert, you need to know that you're interested in the area, but also that you like the people that you're potentially going to be working with. So my mum always said to us, if you get an interview, remember that you're interviewing them as much as they're interviewing you. So I gave the advice to John, my brother, to yes, talk to the PI, but if you get an opportunity, talk to the postdocs, talk to the students. If you find out that they've had previous, postdocs, go and chat to them. I think it's been easier because I've stayed in the same city. It is quite a tight network. So if people have, if I got a job with somebody, other people would know that person, and I'd be able to just ask them. Whereas I think it's a bit more challenging if you do move away to a totally different country, and you can't just pop over and ask the PhD student what your supervisor's really like. But I would trust your gut instinct as well, because most people say have got a good judgment of character. If you strongly value your work-life balance and they do too, then it aligns quite nicely. Whereas if maybe you are 100% a workaholic, then I think it's important to look for that sort of balance and match between you and your PIs.
And you say how you've stayed sort of within one city. Have you ever considered sort of branching out somewhere a little bit different, or you're very much heart set on Glasgow?
I know. So I've literally moved from Edinburgh to here, and I very rarely mention the E word in Glasgow. It's the frowned upon. So no, it's a good point, and a lot of people in academia still believe that you do need to move around to get anywhere in science. So in my home life, I've obviously got the horse, and horse riding is my big passion. But my partner tends to be the one that moves around. So he has worked in Romania, Africa, Australia, where else? Turkey, Greece, Aberdeen, Southampton. So in our relationship, I've always been the one that stayed in the same place. So I think in academia, if you have a relationship, it would be a bit hard if you're both traveling around because you'd never be in the same country. So in that sort of sense, I've always stayed in Glasgow. Not because of that, but because I also love it here, and I do love the projects that are on offer and the positions that come up. So it's not that I've necessarily gone out my way to seek Glasgow only positions. So when I was applying for PhDs, I was a reserve candidate for Imperial College. So if I'd got that, I would have moved to London, and I might still be in London. But I think it was just kind of the trajectory of my career. It's not that I've sought out to stay only here, but I think it's kind of worked that way. And also, right now, if I were to move anywhere, it would be expensive to fly the horse over somewhere, the dog. But I'm not ruling it out.
So, what are some of the challenges you've faced throughout your career, and how exactly did you overcome them?
So obviously there's different types of challenges. It's, you have your personal home life challenges, and then you have your actual work challenges. So work challenges, I think it's always quite difficult when you first start your PhD. It can be quite isolating and lonely role. So, a lot of your experiments might be in a lab where you're just working by yourself for hours on end, sometimes without a window, speaking from experience. And it can be quite lonely and isolating, yeah. So I think that's quite difficult. And don't know if you've noticed, I like talking and I like talking to people. So I think that was quite a struggle for me to go from being surrounded by lots of people to being just in a lab by myself. So I think having your work-life balance helps that. Other challenges can be dependent on the samples and things you work with. You might work with an animal model, you might work with cell work or patient samples, and that can have its own challenges as well. We worked with like post-mortem material in one of my postdocs, and you read all the the post-mortem analysis and the report that they have, and some of it can be quite upsetting. Or if you work with animals, you can get attached to them because you care about them. So I think that can be quite difficult. So I think having an outlet again is quite important, and to help you kind of process any issues you've gone through. I think writing up is a big challenge. As well, I think in your thesis journey, you kind of first year you come in, you're learning, you're new, excited, you're fresh faced, you're not tired. And then you kind of get to second year where some things stop working. I think you've experienced a few technical hiccups. So like things stop working for no reason at all, and you have to try and work out why they're not working. That can be really frustrating. And then in third year, it feels like you're just constantly working and just producing data and trying to organize all your thoughts and experiments. So I think that can be quite a big challenge. And then writing up, again, you're back to the lonely sort of isolation of sitting at a desk typing. And I remember one day, poor Gav, my partner, had come back, and I had his hoodie on. He's like 6'3", so his hoodie on and my brother's joggers on, and I was just sitting in the hallway. Sure. He was like, "And how's writing gone today?"
Yeah.
So yeah, I think writing up could be quite difficult.
Yeah, I don't think my partner's particularly looking forward to when I'm going to be in the house for 24 hours a day and
no, it's yes, and I think it is important again when you are in that writing up phase to remember to reward yourself if you have had even if you've had a bad day, just get out of the house, see people, go for a walk, or if you're a book person, sit and read a book, or play music, whatever your thing is. So yeah, I think work challenges are those main ones for sort of PhD type things. And then the other, I would say for postdoc challenge, it's very difficult to leave your PhD and then to be considered a specialist in your area immediately. So I left nicotine addiction, and that was my area. I knew the different areas in the brains and the different neurons and connections that ran between them. I knew the behaviour that would be expected when you administered nicotine at different times. And then I was processing, human material, and I needed to learn about TBI, traumatic brain injury. And it can be quite difficult to then be like, right, I need to read all the background. And then now, for example, I went from being in stroke research to hypertension, which is more sort of cardiovascular vessel related, and I'm definitely not a cardiovascular scientist. I don't know enough about the heart yet. But yeah, I think there's lots of different challenges, and my main points would be have support outside your work, but also have people inside your work that you could go to if there is an issue, and also have time for yourself to do what you enjoy.
So what are some of the skills that you've kind of taken away from each of your roles, and are there any like examples that you've had that have been like really useful at moving between sort of quite different areas of neuroscience and I guess now into cardiac science?
Yeah, that's a good point. I think my PhD work was heavily in vivo based, so it was a lot of histology. I did a lot of behavioural testing, so that was great, and I think I learned research independence. My PI at the time was head of the school, head of the institute, and he was retiring, so he was very much sort of wrapping up. So it was quite independent, and it was a small group, a very small group, which I think was good for me. When I then went to the Queen Elizabeth, again, I think it was a bit of a different sort of learning process. So Dr. Stewart's a consultant neuropathologist, so he had his NHS duties. So a lot of the time he was either there or in America. So just I felt like I had to make sure everything was running smoothly when he wasn't there. So it was kind of almost a bit of a shift to being in quite a tiny group to being in a managerial almost position, because at one point there was myself, 3 PhD students and 2 lab technicians. So when Dr. Stewart was out of the country, I wanted to make sure that things were still getting processed. So we'd have weekly meetings and take meeting minutes and make action points. So that it was a good learning. It was a steep learning curve because I had to be like, "Ooh, there's other people in this, why are they using my reagents?" So we had to, monitor stocks, and we were also getting brain donations in from all across the country. So it was quite a good learning process in how you can, ship material around the country that's for biological use. And then coming to Lorraine's position. Again, I came back to in vivo work, so it was great to do that. I took on looking at extracellular vesicles, which are basically, tiny lipids, particles that go around your body. So I learned different methods of isolating them. So it was a big step up in my molecular lab skills, and as well as in vivo thing. And then having a few students to look after there. So more supervisory role, which was great. I also took on my ARUK rep role, which I loved. I've just stepped down from it, and I think they're probably glad. But I tried to do a little bit more sort of outreach activities, fundraising, working with ECRs to try and, a bit like what this whole podcast is about really, is to try and improve research culture for early career researchers and sort of help them based on things I've learned and what other people I know have learned. And then I'm continuing that on in my current position. So my current PI is Dean of MVLS, so the Medical and Veterinary Life Sciences College here. So he's not in the lab. So we've got PhD student that I'm training up. And so it's I think for me, it's gradually taking on those roles to hopefully at some point be a PI, where I've had a little bit more responsibility and management, and also applying for grants, writing papers. It's each step's definitely had its challenges, I would say, and learning curves.
Just going back to touch on that research culture that you were talking about a minute ago. So we came back from the Alzheimer's Research UK conference in Aberdeen a few weeks ago, and there was actually a really good panel on inclusivity in research. So it's quite clear that there's a bit of a gender disparity between sort of male and female PIs and in the research community in general. Do you think this has hindered you in sort of moving forward in your career in any way? And what would be your advice to anyone who feels they may be out of place going into dementia research?
That is a heavy question. How long have you got? Yeah, you're spot on. I think that so gender disparity, unfortunately, in a lot of professions is very, very heavily weighted to males, and predominantly the white males. And in our university, we're particularly male white heavy in professors and the higher roles. And in the more junior roles, like postdocs and admin support, we're very heavily female dominant. To be honest, I would say I don't like to think that it has hindered me, but it probably has. There's been meetings where I've been asked to take minutes because I've been the only woman in a room. I've been asked to sort out the blinds and the lighting before. There's many women that have been asked to go and get coffees just because they're the only female. I think things like that are hard to, not notice and pick up on, and it does make you very angry. And unfortunately, sometimes when you're angry, you're maybe not your best self. I think that's maybe hindered me in some points. So it is difficult. I think it also has encouraged me to keep going. It kind of gives me the motivation to stand up and to be a successful woman in science or whatever role I continue down on. We, in our particular school, we only have one female professor. And I think that is a shocking statistic. And I think it's important when you are a female or of an ethnic minority to have somebody that you respect and you can look up to that can guide you and help you in these situations where you do feel left out. So I think working for Lorraine did give me a bit of a kick up the bottom. What words could we use in this podcast? Bottom. To be that person in science that can keep going and also to include others. I think it's very easy to become blinded to just seeing who's around you rather than who's not around you. Does that make sense? Who's been left out? Yeah. So
I think it's just an important thing to make people aware of, especially like for someone like me who, like you said, I'm a white male, so I may not be aware of these certain things. So it's a really important thing to actually hear from someone who experiences it. And I'm sure there will be many sort of undergrads or PhDs who are women and will look at you and go, I want to be like Josie. And you are very much really sort of being that role model, and there's definitely a lot of space in science for more people like you.
Well, I should say as well that there is a definite, thank you for that, but there is a definite lack of ethnic minorities in science, and University of Glasgow has recognised that, and it developed PhD programmes to purely support people from different ethnic backgrounds. So I think it's important to recognise that as well. But no, I think it's a very good point that you raised, and it's very important that you recognise it, which is great.
Yeah, that's definitely something that I think needs to be considered at sort of all levels in science, from PhD students like me right up to the top of sort of vice chancellors of universities. Yeah. So moving on from that sort of slightly deeper but still quite important point, something a bit more light. What part of your job most excites you?
Very good question. Results. Look, I do love getting results. I know it sounds daft, and everybody loves results and data, but it's doing it. I don't mean results as in the end polished thing. I just mean simply putting on an experiment, waiting a couple of hours and seeing what's happened. I love that part. I just did a trip to the Netherlands for a lab project member, and one of the postdocs there described me as like having an excitable puppy in the lab. Because when he put it on, I was like, this is exciting. And I think it's important to be excited about things, because you are doing novel research. The research you do in the lab every day is new and novel and hasn't been done before. And you should be really proud of the fact that you're doing that and really excited by these unknowns that you're looking into, because, you're not doing this because you've been forced to. You're doing it because you enjoy it and you're interested in the research. So yeah, I think I do get quite excited when I'm doing a project and just, put a plate on, and I'm waiting half an hour, and I go back and see what colour it's changed. It sounds daft, but I think people need to celebrate the small things. Don't look at these big projects and be like, I finally got the paper out, and that's when you celebrate. Celebrate every day. Celebrate all these little stages. You pipetted right, win.
So leading on from that, what motivates you, and what advice do you have for anyone who's feeling demotivated?
That is a good question. I think it's very easy to become demotivated, either because you're burnt out and exhausted, or maybe home or personal life has got in the way, something's happened, or maybe it's personal conflict, you maybe don't get on with somebody in the lab. I think my advice is to tackle what's causing the demotivation. It could be, a whole host of reasons. So when I feel demotivated, I'm normally hungry, to be honest, or I've got too much on my plate and I am maybe not quite focused and I've just had enough. So I think if I'm demotivated, I tend to have a break. But what motivates me is the enjoyment for what I do and the people that I work with. I really like my boss. Stu's really supportive, and like when I told him that I'm going on this podcast, obviously he's nothing to do with Alzheimer's research, and he was just like, "Brilliant, that sounds great." And it's just nice to have that the people around you that motivate you when you're maybe feeling a little bit less motivated. But I would definitely say if it's something that's common and you don't feel motivated often, then I think people need to maybe, assess maybe if something's not quite right and if you need to do more positive things in your life.
Definitely, that's really good advice. So now we know about your career. In the next part of the show, it's time to get some speedy career and life tips. These are quick-fire questions. Are you ready?
Oh, God. Yeah, on you go.
What's one thing you wish someone had told you when you were at the career stage I am currently?
Ooh, enjoy yourself. I think it can be really stressful, but you need to enjoy it. It's a great point in life.
What habits have you found help you to be more productive?
Turn off Netflix, stop looking at Facebook, stop looking at pictures of horses and dogs.
I guess one that's quite relevant for you. How important is science communications?
Oh, it's essential. You need to tell the public and others outside of your work what you're doing and why we're doing it and why we need more money and funding.
Do you have any networking advice?
Pub. Go to the pub. That's when people are most relaxed. And as you saw when we were at ARUK, we had a great time with the ECR social. It's the most time you're relaxed and you can talk about things in a nice, open way. You don't have to drink to be there, but just even the environment.
Yeah. It does look like the Scotland Network do sort of enjoy a little social event. So
we're a social bunch.
But how and where do you find inspiration in your research?
Those around me, podcasts, not I think those around me, and Twitter as well. I think just looking at what other people are doing and what other people are up to. I don't know why I'm speaking faster because they're quick questions.
Right. How do you maintain a good work-life balance?
Hobbies. Definitely have hobbies. You need to have something outside of work that you enjoy. You need to de-stress, but also work at the same time.
What's a goal you're currently working towards?
Well, a fellowship. This is a long-term goal. I'm working towards at some point applying for a fellowship. I really want to have my own lab. I would love to be able to take my research in exactly the way that I would like to do it rather than working with somebody. So fellowship would be the next thing for me.
Yeah. So you've done really well to have so many publications. What advice can you give us on writing, and how do you manage the challenges of writing with multiple co-authors?
So I would say that this is always a challenge. Papers never have a deadline, or not normally have a deadline. So you do need to make either your own deadlines or literally force time in your calendar. And me and my mentor, so your granddad, Ian Harrison, we talk about this quite a lot, and I do need to sort of make time in my diary to do writing. And I think it is difficult writing with multiple authors. It's a bit like having any kind of collaboration, but I think communication is really important, either on Zoom or email. But as long as people communicate, it normally makes the best papers and collaborations.
So that's it. That was the last one. So let me recap on the main takeaways. So Josie's advice seems to be that enjoy yourself, and Twitter is a good place for inspiration.
And go to the pub.
and go to the pub. We're now in the last segment of the show. And before we finish, we just want to talk a little bit more about mentoring. So why did you decide to become a mentor, and what advice would you have for anyone listening who doesn't have a mentor?
Good question. So twofold. I wanted to become a mentor because I wanted to help others, because I've been in places where you've maybe not had that guidance that you maybe need. So I would like to help others through journeys I've sort of gone through as well. And secondly, it's to improve my own mentoring ability for future. Everybody learns differently, and everybody takes different advice. Everybody needs different advice, or even just to listen to. So yeah, I think it's twofold: help people, but also to make myself better at probably listening, not talking so much.
So, do you think your mentor has to come from the same field as you?
No, absolutely not. I think sometimes it's good to have somebody from a different field. It gives a totally different perspective. It's great having somebody in your field as well, because they maybe know a bit more of the fine details, but I don't think you need one from the same field as you.
So I think the good thing about this mentorship scheme is that it gives you sort of the pairs are sort of from very different fields. So my supervisor, Professor Fern at the University of Plymouth here, he's very good for the whole sort of white matter biology side of things, but then I can come and I can chat to you about sort of whether it's to help with a bit of writing or presentations and stuff like that. So it's really good to gain those other perspectives for more sort of, I guess general help rather than really specific and niche things. So just sort of following from that, do you think it's a good idea to have multiple mentors at the same time, maybe supporting you in different ways?
Yeah, I think what you said spot on. I do think you need to have multiple mentors, especially at different sort of career stages as well. I think helps. So I've got Lorraine and Stu, who Stu's professor here, Lorraine's a reader here, and then Ian Harrison's got his own fellowship in this sort of the more sort of starting up your lab type stage. So I think it's also important to have that. But I do think as well you learn a lot from other people. I think so. We have a PhD thesis mentoring scheme here, and one of my thesis mentees is a complete perfectionist, and it just really shows how erratic some of my writing or lab practices are. So I think it's important, not just more senior and more junior. I think different areas, different stages, and different personalities as well. I think sometimes quite a good one to have.
So the last question is a bit more of a fun one. If you could choose anyone from history, alive or dead, to be your mentor, who would you choose?
This is a good question. So I am a true believer of if you meet somebody, they might not live up to your expectations. I don't even want to be disappointed by the dead people. So to be honest, I think I would stick with the mentors I have. I know that's really corny and bleh, but Lorraine, they're listening. Well, they bloody should be. If they're not, I'll be playing it in their office. But Lorraine and Stu are fantastic mentors, and Ian's been incredible as well. So I would like to stick, please.
Well, that is all we have time for today. I'd like to thank my amazing mentor and guest, Dr. Josie Fullerton. If you'd like to find out more about Josie, you'll find her bio and some of her previous blog and podcast contributions on the Dementia Researcher website. Thanks, Josie.
Oh, thanks, Alex. It's been really lovely. Sorry you've had to listen to me for 42 minutes. And if anybody who is listening does want to get in contact, then I would definitely say about the mentoring scheme or about anything else, and please feel free to contact me. probably Alex as well.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, it's been really valuable experience for I think everyone involved. So, well, the Ask Your Mentor podcast will be back soon with another mentee grilling their mentor. But for now, I'm off to go and plan my career. I'm Alex Mellor, and you've been listening to the Ask the Mentor podcast from Dementia Researcher in association with Alzheimer's Research UK.
Yeah.